the Unlearning Ableism podcast, sponsored by Evenbreak, making the uncomfortable comfortable. Isn't it time we started unlearning? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Unlearning Ableism podcast, sponsored by Evenbreak.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to another episode of Unlearning Ableism. And I am so excited because this isn't just like our other episodes that we have done. Today is really special in a way because this will be the first episode that will become a podcast for Unlearning Ableism. Yay!
Yay, go team!
And we just want to clarify, it's not like a podcast, like your standard podcast. You think, yeah, I can just listen to this. It's going to be a backlog of all of our previous episodes. There is going to be a YouTube space where you can watch the videos with captions that have been done manually, because as we know, the captions that you can't switch on LinkedIn, please do so if you need to. The captions are not that great with an Irish accent. So we promise somebody will be rectifying those captions, and then you'll be able to listen on the go or watch live, depending on your mood or how you're feeling. So super excited time. But what's even more exciting is that we are being sponsored. Now, we are being sponsored by Evenbreak. Now, I'm not going to dive into it. I'm going to let Celia take over.
So I'm going to tell you all a little bit about Evenbreak, and we're going to be doing this at the start of each episode. So today's episode is brought to you by Evenbreak. They are an award-winning global social enterprise run entirely by and for disabled people. If you're looking for a job with inclusive employers, look no further. The Evenbreak job board is the perfect place to apply for jobs with inclusive employers and set up personalised job alerts. Evenbreak is much more than a job board. You can also access invaluable resources and guidance via their career hive. Whether you need help with disclosing your disability, boosting your confidence, improving your CV, or honing your internet skills, the career hive has you covered. And if you're seeking personalised career advice, Evenbreak provides free career coaching from coaches who have the lived experience. So if you need to take the next step in your career with support from a truly inclusive community, visit www.evenbreak.co.uk today. Also,
that was so good.
Doing our quick visual descriptions, I'd just like to say I'm very well aware of my previous mistakes in terms of accessibility with how shockingly bad my camera was. Please all note my beautiful new camera, and hopefully the high definition isn't scaring anybody and I don't look atrocious. But I am a white female wearing clear glasses. I was going to say spectacles then. What was I going to say? Spectacles.
Fancy.
I have dark blonde hair, which is tied up out of my face, and I'm wearing a white and blue stripy jumper.
And I am a white male who is Casper White. I am just going to say that. I am Northern Irish. The sun is so rare here. I have dark hair that is pushed up to one side, hairspray within an inch of its life. As I said off camera before we started the live, please let's not talk about the fact I need a haircut. I have blue eyes that like to dance across the screen, and I have a short dark beard that probably needs a trim too. But again, let's not talk about that. I am wearing a white t-shirt with a shirt that is green, white, and orange and brown. I promise you it's not a tricolour, it just looks that way. And I am sat in my office. So welcome. And that intro for Evenbreak. So we are adding a video. So you've seen the temporary video we're using, which is great. The automated voice is maybe not that great, but we'll say nothing yet. But with that there, we are going to be including an intro of Evenbreak in all of our adverts. So do check that out. I will be giving updates in each episode about what Evenbreak are doing. If you're an employer listening to this here, how you can reach out and get support from Evenbreak, or if you're a disabled candidate who is looking for your next job, we will be promoting Evenbreak's job board. So do check out things to come. Do let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Remember to share, remember to follow our page, and tag in some people you think need to be listening to today's conversation, which is centered around disabled talent. And because we are now being sponsored by Evenbreak, because this is going to be our first proper podcast, who better to join us than the incredible CEO and founder of Evenbreak, Jane Hatton, who I have to say is a personal idol of mine. Let's bring Jane on stage.
Hi,
Jane.
The royalty has arrived.
Fantastic to be here.
We're
Do I
so
do a
happy
quick
to have you here.
description, quick visual description?
Yes, give us a description of yourself and a little bit about your background, Jane. Tell us
Yeah,
who you are.
for sure. So white female in her 60s, I'm just waiting for people to say, never, you don't look in your 60s.
You don't look a day over 30.
Too late, when you've got to count it, it's too late. So white woman in her 60s with short blonde hair, a bit more makeup than normal because I've had the lurgy and I wanted to make sure that I didn't frighten the horses today. And so, yeah, that's me. I'm sitting in front of a spider plant, which I have to be very careful because if I sit like that, it looks like I've got a silly green hat on. I'm wearing a blue T-shirt.
Fabulous, fabulous. And I know it was late to say, but you don't look a day over 50, Jane, or 30, sorry. You don't look a day over 30.
Too late.
Too late. Damn it. Jane, we are so excited to have you here because you are our pillar within the disability community.
That's very
Whenever
kind.
your name appears everywhere, you're helping recognize the incredible individuals in the community. You're helping individuals find roles so they can find inclusive employers, but you're also helping organizations. And you're doing so much more in between. So can you give us a little snapshot of view of your background and what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I've always been interested in equality and fairness. My mum tells me that when I was 8, I started refusing to go to school. And I was actually quite liked school when I was that age. And it turned out that it was because the children who had free school meals were made to line up in a separate queue from those of us who didn't. And I found that was absolutely outrageous and couldn't even put into words why I was so angry about this. And eventually my mother took me into the head teacher and we had this conversation. And then they gave the children who had free school meals tokens so that we could all line up and nobody knew who was who. And it just, I don't even remember that, but that's something that my mother tells me. And I kind of grew up with that, really being angry about anything that was not fair or didn't seem to me to be fair. And then I had a very varied career, which I won't bore everybody with. It started off in civil engineering, which in the 70s was very unusual for a woman, still fairly unusual for a woman. And then I sort of went according to stereotype into social work. So, that's what women do. They go and look after children in children's homes, and that's exactly what I did. But even then, I was very conscious that kids who'd grown up in care were really disadvantaged in things like housing, careers, progression, all of that kind of thing. And if you were a child in care who was from a different ethnic background or was disabled or was gay, then, your chances were even more limited. So I was very conscious of this kind of imbalance between those who can and those who can't. So I kind of ended up going into inclusion and diversity without that much knowledge, but I did go and do a degree and learned a little bit more about it, but didn't have lived experience at that point of anything very much other than being female. And then I became a single parent, so I suppose that counted. But one of the things I was really concerned about when I was talking to employers about disability equality was that I would usually get the reaction, why on earth would I want to employ a disabled person? I mean, they might not have said it in those words, but you kind of knew what they meant. Or less often, they would say, actually, we recognize this is a really good, group of talent that we should be tapping into, but we don't know how, and disabled people never apply. So I spoke to, and I wasn't disabled then, so I spoke to disabled people and said, why aren't you applying to those companies that want your talent? And they said, because we don't know which is which. Every employer says we are an equal opportunities employer or we are an inclusive employer. But actually, some of those employers didn't even include disability on that list when they were looking at diversity. It was about race or gender, or if we were really lucky, LGBTQIA+. But disability just didn't feature. And I remember thinking, God, that's really bad. Somebody should do something about that. And then, kind of quirky twist of fate, when I was in my early 40s, I became one of those disabled people I'd been talking about. So I had a spinal condition, which I won't bore everybody with, which, of course, I kept thinking was going to get better, had surgery, didn't get better, ended up for about 7 years lying flat in bed because I really struggled to walk or stand or sit. And at that point, I thought, nobody's done anything about this problem. And I am now one of those people. This is up close and personal now. So I thought of, not all by myself, with colleagues, I thought of an idea of coming up with a job board that was just for disabled people who were looking for new or better work and just for those employers who were enlightened enough to see us as a pool of talent rather than a source of problems. And so Evenbreak was born. This is back in 2011. So I didn't know at that point if I'd ever become mobile again or whether Evenbreak would work. And it seemed like a good idea. And for about the first 6 months, it really didn't go anywhere. And I thought, oh, it was a good idea. It's just not going to happen. But then it suddenly started to take off, and employers were recognizing, oh, this is how we can attract that kind of talent. And candidates were recognizing, oh, this is how we can identify which employers really do want our talent, because why would they pay to advertise their jobs on a job board for disabled people if they didn't want our talent? And amazing things have happened since then. So I made a couple of decisions at that point. It was just me in my bed with my laptop suspended above me. One was, if ever we get big enough for me to need to employ people, I will only employ people with lived experience of disability. And the reason I thought that was because I'd been to so many conferences and talks and seminars and workshops where non-disabled people were telling other non-disabled people what disabled people needed. And I now knew what it was like to be both. I'd been non-disabled and I knew the ignorance that comes with that, well-meaning and well-intentioned, but now I knew what it was like, at least what my disability was like. So I wanted us to be staffed by disabled people and to be a not-for-profit. And so now we're, 13 years on? We employ 22 people, all who have lived experience of all kinds of different conditions, different barriers, different access needs. And the success that Evenbreak now enjoys, we are the only global job board that is run by and for disabled people, is not down to me. It's down to such an amazing team. Honestly, every day I count my blessings because the team is so talented, so motivated, understand the barriers because we all have that lived experience, but come up with ideas and things that I would never come up with in a million lifetimes. So I consider Evenbreak to be very much down to that lived experience of the team that we now have, and we're growing.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And I think we can attest, because we've spoken to quite a few of the team. There's actually Gemma in the chat who we have absolutely tortured with back and forth emails and calls, and I now voice note Gemma. Apologies, Gemma. But the team is an incredible team, and when you look at what you're doing, I've had the pleasure of working within the corporate world and working with Evenbreak, and like seeing that partnership and how you support organisations and the commitment and change that you actually make an employer commit to. It's not just here, you've got a job board and that's it. It's no, we'll actually need to do this before you can use this job board. That's how you be more inclusive. And it's just incredible. And I want to bring the conversation into ableism, because in your life, Jane, as you were experiencing, as you said you were in bed for 7 years, how is ableism, what role would ableism have played in your kind of journey with Evenbreak, and what do you do at the moment?
Yeah, I think, there's all sorts of ways we could talk about this for weeks, couldn't we, really?
Yes.
I think for me that the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues, there are many, is around the lack of understanding around invisible disability. So when we talk to even, senior people within organizations, when we talk to, people in the community, there's a kind of assumption that if you're disabled, you either use a wheelchair or you have learning disabilities. And of course, those are very important parts of our community, but they don't define all of us. And I don't know, 80 to 90% of disabled people don't actually have any visible clues to the fact that they are disabled. And there's an assumption that we aren't if we don't look, well, you don't look disabled is almost said in an accusatory way. And I think that ableism is about assuming that everybody looks or feels the same if they're disabled. And we're such a diverse group of people. And I think those assumptions are, really difficult to deal with. And you can't get it right if you're a disabled person. You sort of, if you talk about your disability and say, oh God, I have so much pain. I'm obviously a lot more mobile now than I was in 2011. I'm pleased to say I've become significantly more mobile, but I still have chronic pain. And if I talk about that pain, you can kind of see people going, oh God, she's off again. And actually what I find is that most disabled people, either with invisible or visible conditions, don't go on about their disability because it doesn't define who we are. We don't want pity. We don't want the assumptions. And so, I've had things like, I remember going to pick up my eldest daughter's wedding dress from the shop before her wedding, and we parked in a blue badge space, and I have a blue badge. And when we got back to the car, this guy really tore a strip off me. How dare you? And I think he thought he was being well-meaning. He was saying, those parking spaces are for people who really need it, and you're obviously not disabled because you've just walked to that car. And, there's that kind of assumption that if you don't look disabled, then clearly you don't have any access barriers. Unfortunately, he picked the wrong person because my daughter is not one to be quiet. So she did inform him in no uncertain terms and describe to him what the social model of disability was all about and invisible disabilities. And you don't know what my mom goes through and all of that kind of stuff, which was great. But I think it is the assumption. And that actually, as a disabled person, whatever you do is wrong. If you talk about your disability, you're looking for pity or you're attention seeking. If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. And that's really hard, I think, when you're a disabled person trying to navigate the world and actually want support, don't want pity, don't want to be labeled. It's really a minefield, isn't it? And I think ableism puts us in that position, and it shouldn't. We shouldn't be in a position to have to make the decision about, do I mention it? Do I not mention it? If I do mention it, what do I say? What do I tell them? It's a constant dilemma. We shouldn't have to have that dilemma.
And I think as well, you touched on something really important there that I wanted to bring up. I've lived on both sides of the spectrum of having a completely non-visible disability. As I get older, it's becoming more and more visible. And I definitely notice that the barriers I'm facing now are definitely different to the barriers I faced as a child. There are still those underlying ones that have remained constant, but there are new barriers that I'm now dealing with, which I've not dealt with before. And anybody that has a fluctuating condition or a progressing condition, that can be quite challenging. But kind of bring the conversation to employment, one of the biggest challenges that I've always had, and I was not self-employed when I was working from other people, was I have to say something because I need something, but I'm terrified to say something because I'm terrified about what the consequences are going to be. So you're having that debate with yourself. And I remember I have two instances I reference. My first reference was I decided to say nothing and ended up having a seizure like on my second day or something. Absolutely mortifying. I did it in a really public place, and it was just, and I was working in London at the time, and the ambulance they sent was a man on a bike, like a little push bike. It was hilarious when I came round and a push bike was there, and I thought, I'm not going to fit on that. And because I hadn't said anything, there was no support in place to deal with the situation, and everybody freaked out and everybody was scared. And then the second situation, when I did tell them from the offset, I'd already been offered the job, and I wrote a Metro article about it, which I think most people have in this chat that we know have read. They then took my job offer away from me because they said, well, sorry, you're not going to blend with the team and all of that usual crap that you get. But that, I think, is a really interesting conversation that I'd love to have with you is where is that line at the moment, and how do we as disabled people kind of balance that conversation of, I need to say something, but I don't know how to say it, or I'm scared to say it. And I think a lot of people want the answer to that question because it's something we hear time and time again is, how do I approach this situation?
It's the biggest question we get asked as well. When should I talk about this at all? And every situation is different, obviously. So if it's an invisible condition, then you do have the choice whether to talk about it or not, at least, up until, well, all the way through. If it's a visible condition, you can make the choice until you come face to face with that person, and then it becomes visible. I think it depends on what adjustments that you might need. And it depends on whether, for me, it's always about what's in it for the candidate. So the candidate needs to look at what's best for them. So as an individual, I would always say, because for me, it's a filter. So if I'm going for a job and they have a problem with me having access needs, that tells me that's not an organization I want to work for. So it's actually something I would bring up very early on. Because it's not just about the organization selecting the right candidate, it's also about us as candidates selecting the right organization. And if I feel with an organization, they've not asked me if I need any access needs, I've told them that I do, and they've reacted in a bad way, that makes my decision for me. I don't want to work for you. But not everybody is like that. Some people might prefer not to say. So I would always say, mention it when when it's best for you. So it might be after you've been given the job, although, as you say, they could withdraw the job. They're very legally liable, of course, if they do that. But for me, it is that constant dilemma. And what I think should happen is that organizations, employers, should remove that dilemma as much as they can. You can't remove it completely because it's still going to be the case. But if you put things into place, like, for example, giving the questions out before interviews to every candidate, regardless of whether they've asked or not. You know, when you invite someone to an interview, say, we're inviting you for an interview on this day, this time, whatever, we will be asking you these questions, or we will be asking you questions about the following. So that means that someone with, say, autism or anxiety or whatever doesn't now have to say to that employer, oh, really sorry, but is there any chance I can have the questions in advance? It's already been done. You don't have to ask that question. So I think, you know, some of it is on us as disabled people to mention. I do think it's really important to mention it in a positive way, though. I mean, we've had candidates who spend the first part of their application telling the employer exactly why they shouldn't employ them. Oh, well, I'm no good at this, and I'm going to need this, and I'm going to need something else. Whereas we talk about our candidates as premium candidates. So we're all different, obviously. Every disabled person is completely unique and different, faces different barriers. But the one thing that we do have in common is that we all face barriers. That's the social model of disability, isn't it? We all face barriers that others don't. It might be inaccessible transport or communication or technology or whatever it might be. And that means that we have to develop skills to navigate around those barriers. So that might be really good communication. It might be problem solving. It might be creative thinking. If we can't do something in the same way that most people do, we've got to think of another way of doing that that's equally, if not more effective. And we don't leave those skills at the door when we go to work. We bring those skills with us. So all of that problem solving, determination, you know, if we ran away at the first sign of a barrier, we'd never get out of bed, like I wasn't able to for 7 years, but, you know, we'd never do anything. So actually navigating around barriers is part of every disabled person's everyday life. And that makes us premium candidates. And I wish that candidates recognise that. I certainly wish that employers recognise that, because that would make everybody's lives easier. But I think
It's that internalized ableism, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's we
Absolutely.
have spent our
Yeah.
entire lives being told, no, you
no
can't,
good.
or you
Do
never
this.
will. You internalize that. And going back to what you said
We
about,
need
you know,
to
what
turn that
small
round, I
things.
think.
Exactly. And, you know, I know from applying for jobs, one of the most simple things that an employer can do that makes such a difference is just straight off the bat saying in the application process, if you have any access needs, let us know and we'll put them in place, kind of, you know, that such short statement has such a powerful connotation where you think, I'm comfortable to be able to say it. And I think, like you said about what you were just saying there about internalized ableism, is employers have a responsibility from the outset to try and break those barriers down. Yes, we have a responsibility to divulge our access needs and the additions that we might need. But at the end of the day, the majority of the responsibility should be on employers. It shouldn't be the other way around. And that's the current imbalance that we're in.
Yeah. And it should take away that, sorry, Jamie. I was
No, go ahead.
It takes away that whole dilemma about, shall I tell them, shan't I tell them, shall I tell them? If they're saying, we really want this process to work for you, what do we need to do? It makes you feel more comfortable to say, oh, actually, yeah, they do recognise that some of us face barriers, and I will ask. Sorry, Jamie, you were saying.
No, do not apologise. Oh my goodness, never. No, I was just agreeing, and it's even the language you use, because even that term access needs, that sounds so much more inviting and welcoming than do you need any reasonable adjustments?
Yeah.
Like, I personally have such a loathing.
What is reasonable?
Because it's such a legal definition, and it's just like we use this legal definition, but we don't use the legal definition for everything else in business. So why do we do it around disability? I think the language, it kind of, not that it scares a candidate, because we know, okay, they're actually willing to offer this, but that change of that language to access needs, it recognizes, do you know what, your needs aren't additional, your needs aren't something that we're prioritizing or going to prioritize. This is something that we're actually willing to do. And it's adding equity to the recruitment process, which people tend to miss out. They think, oh, well, we'll hire anybody, but if the equity is not there, that equality is empty words and an inaccessible ink. And I think as well, when it comes to internalized ableism, you know, you were talking about candidates who will start off and they'll be talking about the negatives. So I can't do this, I can't do X, Y, Z. And you know, I think that is so ingrained in so many of us because we are disabled. it's almost like we apologize for it. So it's like, I can't do this. I'm so sorry. And I have done it so much in the past when I've disclosed and I have been rejected, I have been ghosted. And it kind of taught me I shouldn't say anything. So now when I do say it, it's almost that because I've been through that kind of the back and forth of trying to find employment as a disabled person, which we know is never easy. But for me, like I look at that and I think, I now say, well, yes, I'm registered blind, but you know what? Many registered blind people can create graphics the way I can create graphics, can caption your videos the way I do. And I look at the skills that I have and, what I've overcome and the resilience that shows. And I think that is such a message. I think if anyone's listening here is disabled, is stop apologizing for being disabled. It's not your fault.
Isn't it? You should almost be kind of proud of it. So actually saying, saying to a recruiter or an employer, oh, and by the way, I have this condition and it means that I'm really good at X, Y, and Z. So it might be, I don't know, I have sight impairment. So I am really good at hearing the nuances in people's tone of voice. Or I'm deaf or deafened. And so I'm really good at noticing people's body language because I'm really concentrating. Or I'm autistic, which means that I'm likely to spot patterns in things that you might not. I'm very much stereotyping there because that's not the case for everybody. But it's about each individual looking at, okay, so what benefits can I bring to an organization that others can't? And if nothing else, it is that I face barriers every day of my life and I have developed skills to navigate around them, and they will be useful to you as an employer. So it's not about hiding being disabled. It's about actually saying, I bring something to you as an employer that maybe these other candidates don't. And slowly getting that message across that disability isn't about pity, it's about talent. And hopefully, eventually, we'll get there. I mean, obviously, a lot of the employers that advertise on Evenbreak understand that. They wouldn't be advertising on Evenbreak if they don't. But unfortunately, they are the minority. Most employers will make that assumption that if you're disabled, you're going to be a problem. You're not going to be as productive. You're going to have time off sick. You're going to need expensive adjustments, all of those things. And we need to really challenge that narrative and say there are lots of benefits to the organization, not in pink and fluffy ways, not around makes your CSR look good, it makes your report look good, it means you're meeting quotas, but in real business bottom line, people challenging the status quo saying, why are you doing it this way? It would be so much better if you did it that way. And we're challenged all the time. I love it at Evenbreak. If somebody, one of our team says to me, why don't we do this? And I'm thinking, I don't know. Why don't we do that? Never occurred to me. My brain doesn't work that way. And actually, if we can get organizations into the mindset of thinking, oh my God, look at all these different ways of thinking, these different ideas, these different ways of working that could really enhance our business, then it becomes, let's go and find disabled candidates, not, I suppose we should because we've got a quota. Just changing the whole narrative, isn't it?
And you know what? Quotas, I have like this love-hate relationship with quotas. Because, if you look at the disability on a global scale, which I know is really hard to do, and I think it's really important we say this as well, because I think a lot of time in disability, we focus on the region we're based in. Oh, well, we do this in the UK, or we do this in the US, and we forget the global. We're global, we're not just based in one region, and there's so much nuances and diversity of thought. And quotas in certain countries, like Germany has a hiring quota, you have to hire a certain percentage of disabled people, they have to meet a certain level of disability. It's all to do with the way they accredit and recognise disability in that region. And the employers get fined for not hiring a certain amount of disabled people. The same in France, and mostly quite a lot of companies in Europe have actually implemented this. Yeah. And I look at it and I'm like, I love the idea of this because it is forcing you to take action. But at the same time, I don't like it because I'm like, why do we have to be a quota? Why is it that we have to have this set down that says you need to hire disabled people? It shouldn't be a forced choice. It should be something that you're going, do you know what? Oh my goodness, the diversity of thought we're going to bring in this organization. Oh my goodness, they're going to teach us how to do this. This is somebody who's going to help us challenge our culture, challenge the way that we do things. But what happens is the reality is when you are a disabled person a lot of the time in corporate and you do share ideas, it's like, oh, you're causing problems. Oh, you've got behavioral issues. And I've spent the majority of my life fighting with managers. And I don't want to say fighting because it sounds like I actually didn't have behavior issues. It wasn't fighting, it was challenging. And it was being told, well, oh, you have bad behaviors because you've complained about inaccessibility or because you can't do something. And it's like, if that's what we see as challenging behaviours, is somebody asking to be included, somebody asking, well, why is this not accessible for people like me? We really need to redefine what that means, because that is not the definition of what it means to be challenging. That
Should
is
be
innovation. Yeah, it's innovation of anything. It's innovative to say, actually, this doesn't work. Here's how you can do it better, or this isn't accessible. Here's how you can make it accessible. I want to ask another question around employment, because it is Disability Pride Month, and I think we have to ask this question. We see a lot of controversy around disability pride. There are people who confuse it with just being about LGBTQIA plus disabled people, which we know in a way it is around us, but it's around everybody. It's around the diversity, the intersectionality of disability. It's celebrating and recognizing we are all not the same. And so with Disability Pride Month, there are people who say, if corporate companies do this, it's very tokenistic, they shouldn't be doing it. And then there's people like ourselves who advocate that actually this is such a beacon and such a way to represent and such a way for people to rethink and reframe disability for themselves. So what is your thoughts about Disability Pride Month within that corporate space, within that recruitment space? Like, is it a way to attract or is it a way to disengage?
It's difficult, isn't it? And again, every disabled person will look at it differently. We were in Pride Month last month. We commissioned, again, this wasn't my idea. This was our wonderful Dana, who's in our marketing team, who said, why don't we get a pride flag that represents disability as well? Because there's such a huge intersectionality between people in the queer community, for want of a better word, and disabled people, much higher representation than there is in the rest of the population. So we commissioned this pride flag. It's the intersex flag, and then we had the disability flags.
Yes, I've seen it.
Amazing. It was designed by a woman called Valentino, who is incredible. And I think, for me, the Pride months or the disability days or the awareness days, it can become quite cliched and it can become very closed off. So, Pride Month is only for gay people. No, it isn't. It's for the whole intersex, the whole, LGBTQIA, however many initials you want to, it's inclusive. And anybody in that community who might be black or brown or white or young or old or disabled or not disabled or whatever it might be. So it is all intersectional. I think having these sort of days or months is good in that it makes people think about issues that they might not otherwise think about. Even if it's only on a temporary basis, it can sometimes sow those seeds. So if an organisation is pinkwashing or whatever they might be doing, because of the particular thing, it's bringing that to the conversation. And as we started this podcast really by saying that a lot of employers don't even include disability on their diversity agenda, then at least in this month, they are being forced to think about that. And, maybe there's lots more on social media, there's lots more messaging going out, there's a lot of education going on. So it certainly isn't a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when we do isolate, well, this is just about disability, this is just about that, this is just about that, because we're all, we're not box shaped, are we? We're people shaped. And so I think it's great to raise the awareness, but to make sure that actually that's about good practice that should happen all year round, not just in July or just in June. It's about how can we make sure our processes are such that in the distant future, we don't need a Pride Month, because it's so embedded in our culture that it's just every day.
And so we talk about
that's
that a
what I
lot
was
yesterday.
I was going to add in that conversation. It's something we've spoken about quite a lot, is the fact that there are a lot of things that I'm really sorry if anyone can hear my dog squeaking in the background. She has walked in and I don't want to usher her out because then I have to get up and leave my screen. But now she is squeaking by my feet. So I'm really sorry if anybody can hear that and it's picking that up on closed captioning. Could you go away? Thank you. And one of the things that we were speaking about, she's just had puppies, so she is very squeaky. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the fact that there are so many things that we have to do now that we might not necessarily like in order to get where we need to be. So quotas, I don't like the idea of being a quota, but is it a tool to one day we don't need a quota? Arguably, yes. Disability Pride Month is an incredible tool to raise awareness. Should we have to have a Disability Pride Month? No, because it should always be Pride Month for everybody, no matter what your identity is. But do we need it as a tool now? Yes, because we are so far away from where we need to be. Yes, we have come so far, but we are Jamie and I said it last episode, we're not going to applaud until we're at the end point. You don't clap someone for an amazing cake before they put it in the oven. They've just mixed the ingredients together. You clap them when the cake's come out of the oven and it's already decorated. Jamie and I have been using this week in our work.
I do like cake analogies.
Love a bit of cake.
I think that's a really important thing to add, is that there are so many things we don't want to have to write policy papers. We don't want to have to do all these things. Jamie and I always say the aim of our jobs is to make ourselves redundant one day, because our jobs are not needed and we don't need to do this anymore. And I think quite often, maybe this is a question I wanted to pose to you, was, do you think sometimes as a disabled community, sometimes we actually lose sight of that, about the fact that we have to do some things we don't necessarily want, and we have to raise awareness, and we have to be doing X, Y, and Z in order to get to the end point? Because that burden of responsibility our community carries, to constantly educating, to constantly be advocating, is exhausting, utterly exhausting. Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's also part of Evenbreak's mission statement, is to create a world where Evenbreak doesn't need to exist. We're all talented people. We'd all get jobs somewhere else, so that would be fantastic. It's unlikely to happen in my lifetime, but it would be fantastic to live in a world where we don't need your organization, our organization, or the other organizations. And it is a kind of, sometimes I think it does feel a bit like a burden that we've got to carry on. We stand on the shoulders of giants, don't we? All of the disabled activists that went before us and are no longer with us. We benefit from all of the work that they did. And I like to think that we will benefit future generations with the work that we do. But I don't think that any disabled person should feel an obligation to be that stand bearer or that activist. We're human beings. We have lives outside of being disability. It's hard enough getting through life with, being disabled without having that burden as well.
I always say that I have to live it and I have to work it as well. Like when I close my laptop at the end of the day, I don't stop talking about it and I don't stop thinking about it, because now I've actually got to go and also do it. So everything we've spoken about during the day and advocated for, you now actually got to go and live the fact that you're having to advocate. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can't ever switch off from it.
Almost like a double whammy, isn't it? But I think for those of us who can, and for me it's a lot about privilege, I feel very privileged that I am able to run Evenbreak and that I'm able to attract all the amazing talent that we do, both within our team and also within the candidates that we've got, for our employers. And for me, it doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like something I'm almost driven to do, because I'm so angry about the unfairness of the current state of society. And I can either just sit there and fume, which I do from time to time.
We all do.
We all do. We always say, be angry, allow yourselves to be angry, because there's just such stereotypes, an angry disabled person, angry woman, whatever it may be. And it's like, I have a bloody right to be angry. It's, we're talking about human rights, not privileges. I have a right to be angry and let that out and express that.
Absolutely. And I think for me, what I try to do is turn that anger into something that will make a difference. So there are times when I'll just sit and fume and not do anything, but there are other times when I think, okay, I'm not going to be able to change the world. None of us can. But let's find, this is why I love partnerships with, Unlearning, Ableism and other kinds of partnerships, is that we can't do this on our own. We need to do it together. It's all about collaboration. And for me, for those of us that can do what we can, and I'm really grateful to the disabled activists that went before us, but neither do I feel bad about those who weren't able to do that, because it's not something we have to do. It should be something we choose to do. And if a disabled person decides that's not for me, I'm just going to get on with my life, I'm not going to be an activist, I'm not going to educate people, that's absolutely fine. That's exactly as much of a right as any other choice might be. It's something that drives me, and it's a positive outcome of the anger, let's say, and the lived experience. But there shouldn't be a burden, and yet there is. And won't it be great for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and generations ahead when they can look back and think, oh my God, there was a time when people actually discriminated against disabled people. Can you imagine that?
I can't wait to that point, because it is. I look, my nephew has the same eyesight condition as me, and I look at him and I think, oh my God, please don't let him go through half of what I went through, because if I can do a bit more work today to stop that happening for him, I will work till my fingers are blue until I'm exhausted. I will burn myself out, because I don't want anyone to have to do it. I don't want anyone to have to stand and fight and challenge, and because it's a lot of it's a lot of pressure we carry on our shoulders. And I think when you're in this space, we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about, do you know what? It is so exhausting to come off a panel discussion. You talk about accessibility, to go into building and facing accessibility. It's almost like the definition of irony. You could bet every night and be like, did that really just happen? And I think to myself, if I don't want anyone to have to do that unless they feel compelled to. But I also love the fact there's so many of us in this space. You know, you talked about your journey, Jane, about that anger, that positive anger and that lived experience. It's almost like we need an outlet for it, and that outlet is, let's fix the problem. And I just love that, because to me it's just like, there is no better experience than lived experience, and there's no one who's going to get it better than somebody who's been through it. And I think the more voices that we have, the better. The more voices we have speaking in the space. Obviously, only do it if you see it, but yeah, I look at my nephew and I'm like, no, you don't have to go through this. I will be at every teacher's meeting screaming at them for you. I will do what my mum did for me when I was a kid. I know his mum will do it, but I'm like, do you know what? Let me. I've been through it. I'll tell her where it's gone wrong. But I'm also thinking as well around, around working with it, with work that you do. Can we? Because I'm sure there's organisations listening to this. There are people working within organisations who are like, what exactly can Evenbreak do for us? And I'm conscious that I want to make sure they know exactly what you're doing. Can you give them a little bit more scope into what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of look at the whole disability employment gap and the causes of it. Why is there such a ridiculously big disability employment gap? So you're twice as likely to be unemployed in the UK if you're disabled than if you're not disabled. And there are a whole range of factors. And one of them, of course, is that first one I said, that employers who want to employ disabled people don't know how to find us, and disabled candidates don't know how to find employers who will be open to their talent and actually welcome their talent. And so that the job board kind of helps, well, fixes that problem, if you like. So the employers on there are actively looking for disabled candidates. The candidates can find those employers that want their skills. But there are other barriers, and we know that a huge barrier is perception, inaccessible recruitment processes, hiring managers who are not necessarily discriminatory, but are nervous around disability. They're not sure what words they should use. They're not sure how to support. They're frightened of offending someone or getting it wrong. So we also offer support to employers in terms of training and consultancy. So it might be, let's come in and review your recruitment process, because there may be barriers. There will be barriers in there to certain people who are trying to access your work. Let us do some training with your hiring managers so that they feel confident and competent and able to ask the question, what do you need, so that we can make sure you succeed in this process. So that training and consultancy really is about helping organizations recognize the disabling barriers that exist in themselves as people or in their processes or policies, recognize them, and then put things into place to either remove them altogether or provide alternatives or whatever it might be. But then the other barrier, as we mentioned earlier, is that internalized ableism of candidates themselves. And, what can happen is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The world tells you that you're less than because you're disabled. And you think, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And then you go for countless jobs and you're rejected every time. And then you start thinking, yeah, perhaps I am. And so actually what we need to do is support disabled people looking for work to navigate around the internal and the external barriers that they face. So do you talk about your condition? Do you ask for adjustments? How do you talk about your disability at all? And also looking at what you have to offer, because I've been in this game, as in, diversity and inclusion, and talking around disability for years before I became disabled. And yet, when I became disabled, for the first 2 years, I'm very embarrassed to say this, all I could think about was what I now couldn't do. And I've been saying for years to employers, but disabled people have so much to offer. And now I am one. All I can think about is that internalized ableism, but I can't do this anymore. I can't give my children lifts anymore because I can't drive now. I can't go on holiday. I can't travel. I can't do this. I can't do that. I used to play the violin. I can't play the violin anymore People would say I never could. That's a different story. But, and if that happened to me, of all the people, I should have been the one when I became disabled that thought, okay, well, so life's going to be different, but, I know that it's going to be okay. And I didn't, because it's so ingrained in us that being disabled is less than being non-disabled. So we also now have a career hive for disabled people who are looking for new or better work or promotion, which has all sorts of things like online resources. We do events, we do meet the employer events, we do podcasts like this. We'll be doing in the future, which we're thrilled about. We also offer one-to-one coaching with professional career coaches who also have lived experience of disability themselves, whether that be neurodiversity or sight loss or whatever it might be. And that's really aimed at supporting candidates to recognise their own value, their own worth, believe in themselves, try and undo some of that damage that, a lifetime of rejection has done, and really equip them to sell themselves as well as they can into the workplace. So what we feel is we're helping employers remove the barriers that might be there. We're helping candidates to navigate around those barriers, and then we bring them both together in the with the job board. And everything that we do, as you know, is designed and delivered by people with lived experience. So there's an awful lot we can offer to, whether it's a hiring manager, whether it's a talent acquisition professional, whether it's an employer generally, whether it's a candidate. We like to think we're there in all of those spaces. But we do work in collaboration with a lot of other organisations as well. So it can be a signposting organisation with a first port of call, really. If someone is looking for work and they're disabled, or they're looking for disabled talent, then have a chat with us, because we can always help.
And the website is on the screen, and just to call it the website, it is www.evenbreak.co.uk. It is on the screen. Do check that out. And I do want to do a shout out for you, Grace Hub, because it is incredible. I've been promoting that now, I think, since I did my first ever podcast in Jane. I think I started promoting that, but it is an incredible tool. So do check that out if you are a job seeker.
I was going to say on what you said there. That's all right. It's an important announcement to make. What I was going to say is plug for our policy paper here. Shameless plug. One of the stats that we drew up was only 6.6% of disabled people have never experienced mental health as a direct consequence of their disability. Like, that is a shocking statistic. And I think where Evenbreak and other organizations, why they work so brilliantly and why we need so much more focus on it is I get so infuriated by, okay, we need to look at our recruitment. We need to look at our managing practices. We need to look at our policies. I can guarantee you 99.9% of the time, there is going to be a problem in each single area. And if you don't fix the entire end-to-end process, it doesn't work. So companies are sitting there saying, our policies are really inclusive and accessible, and we give our candidates reasonable adjustments. But if you've got an inaccessible recruitment process, and then they wonder why they haven't got any disabled talent, and why I think it's so important, I wonder if you could kind of touch on that a little bit, because I think it's really useful for people to understand and be aware of. It's about the entire end-to-end process. Barriers don't just exist in pockets, they exist everywhere, especially in employment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. On the other hand, I do think that sometimes we talk to employers who will say, we can't advertise on your job board yet because we're not quite ready. And I think you're right. Everything needs to be in place from end to end, every detail. I'm not sure any organisation has got there yet. I'm not sure that Evenbreak has. We only employ disabled people. We're still learning. And for me, it's a kind of continuous improvement cycle.
Yeah.
So
there is no end point. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a journey. It's not really a destination, because we're continuing to learn. And what I say to organisations who say we're not ready yet is, well, two things. One is, you already employ disabled people. You might not know you do. Yeah. They might not know they're disabled. There are an awful lot of adults around who have autism or dyslexia or ADHD that have gone undiagnosed, as we know. But you will have disabled people there. So if you aren't looking at these things, you are already letting down your existing population of workers, even if you're not recruiting. But the other thing is, if you're saying we haven't got everything right yet, and we've got to get it right before we employ disabled people, what that's actually saying is, as non-disabled people, we need to anticipate what disabled people might need and guess what it's like to have lived experience and try. It's never going to happen. So what we kind of say is do the two things in parallel. Start that continuous improvement journey. There'll be obvious things that you can do, maybe in the recruitment process, as you say, or training managers, that will start to remove some of those barriers. But the more disabled people you employ, the better that internal intelligence is, because everybody is different. And the barriers that I face will be different to the barriers that you face, Celia, they're different to the barriers you face, Jamie. The more disabled people who work in an organisation, the better that intelligence. And so, no, it shouldn't be our job to inform, but it's in our interests too. So if you employ disabled people, they might say, you know, that bit in the recruitment process, I found that really difficult. Maybe we could look at changing that. Or somebody might say, you know, my office space is really accessible, but when I go to the meeting room, I really struggle, or whatever it might be. It'll be different for everybody. And if we're going on this continuous improvement journey, the more that is informed by lived experience, the better it will be and the quicker it will be. So I think no organisation is perfect. I wish all were, but it's never going to happen. But we can all continuously think, I haven't thought about that, haven't come across that before. That's something new. So like, I don't know, long COVID, you know, nobody had heard of that a few years ago. But now employers are having to think about, how do we support employees with long COVID? It's a new thing. There will be other new things that come up. There'll be new assistive technology. You know, all sorts of things will change. Things like the way we work now has just changed beyond recognition since the pandemic. Nobody saw that coming. So I think it is about constantly looking at, how do we operate as a business? How inclusive are we? How can we inform our practice by people with lived experience? And of course, that's not just about disability. That might be about carers or parents or people from different ethnic minorities, or, you know, any kind of difference. But that lived experience is key. And what I really don't want is for employers to think, we've not got it all right, we can't employ disabled people, because that we're back to where we started. So I agree with you. It should be right end to end, but don't let that stop you from progressing, because any progression is, sometimes perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think we need to do what we can and then learn. And every new employee that Evenbreak has, we all learn something new. And that's great. I embrace that. And I think for every other organisation, that's going to be the case as well.
I think it's about being able to take that feedback, being able to hear, you know, I'd love us to be able to normalise people coming and saying, do you know what, this isn't accessible, this isn't inclusive, here's why for me, and here's how you could fix it. Like, it's that shift in mindset instead of saying somebody saying this isn't accessible as, oh no, they're attacking me, they're being rude, oh my goodness, I'm not hiring them because they have the audacity to say something's inaccessible. It's that reframe, realising, do you know what, when somebody is challenging something inaccessible or asking for adjustment accommodation, there's that learning that can happen, and I think we need to learn in that moment. And organisations, they will never get it right. Like, I have worked with so many organisations, and each of them do pockets of, and you know that I'm preaching to the converted to yourselves, but some of them are doing incredible things in one area, and then you go to another organisation and they're doing incredible in another area. And sometimes you'd be like, I'd love to merge us all together, or you all just go sit at the table and be like, what are you doing? Let's learn from each other, because that's what we don't see enough of as well within this space. And I know there is organisations that do this, and you know, there is that kind of, I don't want to get into this here without saying it, but I'm going to say there is, you know, not as much facilitated space where companies can actually sit down together properly without a cost involved. You know, go to events, you know, if Evenbreak's doing an event, go to those events, speak to the other people there, speak to the employers. And I know that you do this within Evenbreak as well, Jen. You do connect the employers, that's incredible. But I think that employers need to get better at learning from each other instead of seeing each other as competition. Well, actually, their marketing looks different to ours. Theirs is accessible. Apparently, why is it accessible?
I do see it happening to some extent. I mean, you know, there are lots of organisations like Business Disability Forum and ENEI and Inclusive Employers and others that do actually, you know, facilitate roundtables, and it's beginning to happen. I think more than it did. Again, it's often preaching to the converted, but for me, if an organisation has the courage to say, we haven't got this right yet, but we're trying to get it right.
So much more powerful.
Yeah. And if I'm a candidate, and you say, I've got everything right, we're perfect, all of our policies are absolutely perfect, you'll never, you know, I'm going to be looking for things, because it's almost like a challenge, isn't it? But if an organization is honest and says, this is really important to us, we really want to get this right, and we know that we're not there yet, but we are trying. Please come with us on this journey and help us to get better. To me, that's I would feel very welcome in an organization like that. I'd feel able to say, let's look at how this is working, because I'm not sure it's working as well as it could, without being shot down in flames, like you mentioned, Jamie. So I think it is about organizations having that ambition to be better, but also being humble enough to say, we're not there yet, but we're on a journey, and we want help on this journey.
100%.
Exactly.
And I think,
I wonder just quickly what.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
go on, Jamie. Yeah.
I was just going to say, with that as well, I think it's so important that companies have something like an accessibility roadmap. And I used to work with AMS, everybody knows. They are work with yourselves, so they do, and they recently talked about their accessibility roadmap they had launched, and I think every organisation should have that, because you're not going to change it overnight. When you have designed a whole company of thousands of colleagues, the cost of going overnight and making everything accessible is not sustainable if you're not a large organisation. So do create an accessibility roadmap. Do involve people, and as you said, people coming into the business, if you're talking about that, people are going to feel more actively able to contribute and say, do you know what, get some tips for that. So I love the idea for accessibility roadmap. Sorry, Celia, I will let you go over to the comments, because we are down to
That's all right.
minutes.
I think I'm slightly lagging. I was just going to read out some of the comments that people had written and contributions to the conversation that I think are brilliant. So there's lots of people saying employers need to realise that support can change and that accessibility looks different for everybody. There's lots of comments to that. Rachel says, great session about individuality, who have different skills and talents, and we need to utilise that and navigate different barriers. Jennifer asked, is there going to be a link available to listen later? Absolutely. You can come back to this page that you're on now, and the video will be there permanently. And we are also going to be uploading these to our podcast site, and we will be posting the link in all the comments as well, and we can send it to you directly. Lots of comments talking about how training is so important and education, and then lots of people talking about their experiences that they've had personally about how they're perceived and how draining it can be, calling out behaviour sometimes. And yeah, anybody that wants to go back and read these comments, I really urge you to, because it's a great place to. One of the things that we've taken so much away from these podcasts is people have that feeling of, I'm not alone. The feelings that I have are actually quite normal to feel, and quite often, because we have this barrier in society where we don't necessarily talk about disability as much as we should, people end up feeling very alone, and that is very heartbreaking to see. So please do go through and read these comments and know that you aren't alone. But in our final moments, Jane, what we love to do is we love to ask our brilliant speakers, because you are an absolute royalty of the disability community, and we are so pleased to have had you on. If you could summarize Disability Pride Month and what all employers and the employment sector should be doing, one piece of advice that you would give in Disability Pride Month and beyond to the employment sector about moving forward in terms of disability awareness?
I think it would be that thing that we've talked about, which is about how we view disability. And for me, it's very simple. It's not about pity, it's about talent. And so I think if we could change that mindset, through Disability Pride Month, in saying that actually I'm not proud of being disabled, because being disabled means that I face barriers I shouldn't face. I'm proud of the things that I achieve despite those barriers. So I know that there are, conflicting views on whether disability pride should be a thing or not. But I think from an employer perspective, it should be very much look at the community of disabled people as a really exciting source of talent that will really benefit your organization, not as a problem to solve. And I think for us as disabled people, it's very much about, be proud about the fact that we're still going. Just sometimes getting through the day is something enough to be proud of. I know when I have a really bad pain day, just having a shower and getting dressed is a reason to be proud. And, we all have those days and face different barriers, but we're still here. We're still going on. We're still carrying on. And I think also just a quick one, when we're talking about employers, and sometimes we'll make out employers to be the baddies. The employers that work with Evenbreak aren't perfect any more than Evenbreak are, but they are trying. They're on that journey. They're really open to learning, to improving, to understanding that disabled talent is premium talent. So I just wanted to put that little caveat in the end. But yeah, disability, if we're looking at employment, is not about pity or charity. It's all about talent.
I love that you
Absolutely.
called us
Mic
premium.
drop.
I've never been called premium before. I love it.
I know I'm sitting over here
It's
feeling I'm sitting premium over here with my B&M budget handy cup. Definitely premium. Jane, this has been incredible. And this is our first episode of the podcast, and it is going to set us up for so much incredible success, so much conversation following this. I'm conscious we are at time, so let's say our goodbyes. But before we do, Jane, where can people follow you? Where's the best place to get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. If you look it up, Jane Hatton, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but probably LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
Perfect. And remember,
Or on the Evenbreak website, I'm always on there.
Perfect. And that Evenbreak website is www.evenbreak.co.uk. And thank you for sponsoring our new live series.
We're so
Evenbreak.
excited to sponsor you. It's great.
There's so much love for you in the comments as well.
There is.
So much love.
lovely.
Everybody's loved this session.
So until next time, join us next week for our 1, 2, 3. Is it the fourth episode? The fourth episode of our Disability Pride Month extravaganza. We will be joined by the founder of Blind Ambition, Seema Flower. We'll be talking about intersectionality, Disability Pride Month, and much more. Until next time, stay inclusive. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Unlearning Ableism podcast is sponsored by Evenbreak, an award-winning global social enterprise run entirely by disabled people for disabled people. So if you're looking for a job with an inclusive employer, or you're an organisation looking for disabled talent, find job listings and set up alerts on the Evenbreak job board today. Visit evenbreak.co.uk or scan the QR code.
The Unlearning Ableism podcast, sponsored by Evenbreak.